9 U.S. Presidents Assassinated by Globalists by Larry Engel. Howdy folks, I am Larry Engel. This is article number 23 about the tremendously popular presidential candidate and Alabama governor George Curly Wallace, a Golden Gloves champion boxer, a farmer's son, a judge. Governor Wallace was gunned down and paralyzed, his lower body paralyzed for life, by an MK Ultra Project Monarch mind control assassin. This was done just as he had taken a favorable position by winning several primaries, and he would have become the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. In this video, I will focus more than usual on the mind control program and its methods, and use encyclopedias, Freedom of Information Act documents, and published news reports that have sparked my intuition and formed my opinion in this matter. The viewer should keep in mind that Governor Wallace and his wife stated publicly they believed the shooter was a lone nut. And Cordelia Wallace, the wife, who was on the scene, reported that she had heard 5 shots that day. People were seeing stock news footage. That news footage, media editors had intentionally doctored, inserting at least 3 more shots. While I contend that the best evidence indicates that only 2 shots could have been heard. 6 other shots fired that day were totally silent and impossible to hear. There is a mystery about how 8 bullets that hit people came from a gun that only held 4 safely and 5 maximum. I would caution the viewer to form their own opinion and not assume that I have some mysterious inside information about some character's guilt. I rely heavily on information from Los Angeles FBI Chief Ted L. Gunderson and his investigation of the Franklin cover-up that you will find on YouTube. And also Mae Brussels' LSD mind control. I have a date, 11/22/1976, which is also found on YouTube. I make the incredible claim that 20 U.S. presidents were assassinated. I know we know about 4 that were shot, and at first I thought there were 5 more that were poisoned. Now I'm claiming that the incredible number of 20 presidents were actually assassinated by the globalists. And I'm beginning to think that there were people all over the world that were assassinated by the same people for the same reason. These would be people in religions, people in mass media, people in industry, people in banking, in nonprofit organizations, people in natural resources. All of these people were killed by the same people for the same reason. And that reason is they want to control the credit of a nation. In 700 AD, they learned that they could conquer a nation by taking over the credit of a nation. And they simply know tricks, or a trick. If they control the volume of money in circulation, they can conquer the country. They can buy up everything. And there's a way that's done. I can explain it to you how that's done, and I may as we go along. The people who do all this murdering call themselves Jews. They call themselves a Jewish banking monopoly. That's what they call themselves. I call them the others because I don't think they're really like Jews. They don't seem to be like Jews. They don't follow the Old Testament. They don't follow the 10 Commandments. They're not listening to Isaiah. They're not listening to Elijah or Elisha or Jeremiah or Ezekiel or any of the Jewish prophets. They seem to go in a different direction. And what direction do they go into? Well, they go into secret societies, engaged in blood, satanic oaths, mass murder, bloodline insanity, serial killing, the worship of Lucifer, and all kind of really ugly, nasty stuff. So they don't seem like Jews to me, but they call themselves Jews. A very hideous reptilian, like dragons in the City of London area, statues, dragons and reptiles rather than human beings. They're a predatory human being. Predators.
In the congressional record of May 23, 1933, is the following. When the Federal Reserve Act was passed, the people did not perceive that a world banking system was being set up here. A superstate controlled by international bankers and international industrialists acting together to enslave the world for its own pleasure. Every effort has been made by the Federal Reserve to conceal its powers, but the truth is the Federal Reserve Fund has usurped the government. It controls everything here, and it controls all our foreign relations. It makes and it breaks governments at will.
Now, if you need evidence, here goes all the way back to 1933. Is there something invisible out there? What's the invisible government? Well, here's the evidence in the congressional record in 1933. They say people like the Federal Reserve, maybe even the World Bank and the International Bank of Monetary Settlements and the special drawing rights and all that, these people try to hide their power. They try to be very secretive. And so they've created a secret international world empire. That was put in the congressional record of the United States of America in 1933.
Amschel Mayer Rothschild, 1773 to 1855, in 1838, said, "Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws." And another, Nathan Mayer Rothschild, 1777 to 1836, once said, "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." He was the head of the Bank of England in London. His N.M. Rothschild and Sons has occupied the same premises since 1809, 2 New Court Street, Swithin's Lane, in London, near the Bank of England and the Stock Exchange.
So if you don't believe the congressional record, there's 2 quotes by Mr. Rothschild. They're confessing. They're telling you that they can, if they can, you give them the control of the money of a nation, they control that nation. Period. Mind control is spelled with a K in German. MK Ultra is a CIA program directed by Hitler's Angel of Death. Joseph Mengele of Auschwitz concentration camp fame was a gracefully handsome man of slight stature. Mengele would disarm people with his gentle demeanor, while at the same time, at other times, he would explode into violent rages.
In a letter to Secretary of Defense CIA's Alan Dulles states, quote, "The agency became interested in the potential importance of psychochemicals, primarily because of the enthusiasm and foresight of Dr. L. Wilson Green, Technical Director of the Chemical and Radiological Laboratories at the Army Chemical Center. Dr. Green's ideas were included in a report written by him in 1949 entitled Psychochemical Warfare, A new concept of war.
He assumed the name Green when he was transferred to the USA on a special CIA program. Mengele, using the name Green, was brought over to the USA according to Freedom of Information Act documents as part of the CIA's Operation Paperclip after World War II. Many scientists were brought. Meanwhile,
Tavistock Behavioural Research Institute, in the City of London, the world's premier mind control facility where mind control is perfected by the world's top behavioral scientists, by neurosurgeons, by psychiatrists and by pharmacologists. China Lake Naval Air Weapons Station, in the remote California desert, became the primary MK Ultra Monarch programming center in the United States, where children are brought in by car, rail and plane, and programmed by top neurosurgeons, by behavioral scientists and by psychiatrists, for different roles in society including prostitution, blackmail and entrapment. The Encyclopedia.
there were 149 sub-projects listed under the umbrella of MKUltra, which the CIA contracted out to various universities, to research foundations, and to similar institutions. At least 80 institutions and 185 private researchers participated. Because the agency funded MKUltra projects indirectly, many of the participating individuals were unaware that they were dealing with the CIA agency. Brenner, the assassin, for his entire life lived in the same city, which has a major university.
Marquette University is a private coeducational, Jesuit Roman Catholic university located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Established as Marquette College on August 28, 1881 by the Society of Jesus, with the intention to provide an affordable Catholic education to the area's emerging German immigrant population. Marquette is the largest one of 28 member institutions of the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities. The Les Aspin Center for Government is an educational program and extension of Marquette University based in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Washington, D.C., with a separate office at Marquette's home campus in Milwaukee. The center is named for former Secretary of Defense and Marquette political science professor, Les Aspin. The university is engaged in classified government medical research.
So here's a little bit of a different idea for you. I bet you've never heard that there's a connection between the banking cartel and the Jesuit Society. Now you think of the Jesuits as Catholics, as Catholic priests. But they started off in 1492 with Ignatius, and the Jesuits are Marrano Jews. What could that be? Well, the banking cartel claims to be a Jewish monopoly. They say, we are Jews. They tell you that. And they were Marrano Jews. They were Jews that were told they had to leave Spain or convert. And so they converted while secretly maintaining their Jewish monopolies and a Jewish control of banking and so on. And so the Jesuit Society, there may be Catholics that are in the lower levels, but the secret higher levels who all obey the Jesuit general, this is all controlled by people called Marrano Jews. Marrano Jews.
The dictionary defines Marrano as crypto or hidden Jews of medieval Spain and Portugal, a disparaging term for a Jew who converted to Christianity in order to avoid persecution, but who continued to practice their religion and political and business activities secretly. The famous and wealthy Rockefellers are Marrano Jews.
So many big-name universities and medical schools and famous researchers and famous authors ended up working on the Project Monarch MK Ultra mind control project. Now, these individuals may not have known that they were working for the CIA, and they may not have had any idea what the overall project was, but they would do research maybe on one form of medication or maybe one form of behavior that they would test. There were different projects that determined different things. Maybe from just their own project they couldn't tell what they were doing. But these were done in the medical science universities, in their part of their university medical schools. While the Project Monarch of the MK Ultra CIA project, which was basically made up of German scientists brought over from America after World War II in Operation Paperclip, including Joseph Mengele, there were a large number of universities and private researchers brought into this.
The Marquette University College of Health Sciences is one of the primary colleges at Marquette University. Biomedical engineering is the application of engineering principles and design concepts to medicine and biology for healthcare purposes. This field seeks to close the gap between engineering and medicine. It combines the design and problem-solving skills of engineering with medical and biological sciences. Neural engineering, also known as neuroengineering, is a discipline that uses engineering techniques to understand and repair, replace or enhance neural systems. Neural engineers are uniquely qualified to solve design problems at the interface of living neural tissue and non-living constructs. An implant is a kind of medical device made to replace and act as a missing biological structure as compared with a transplant, which indicates transplanted biomedical tissue. The surface of implants that contact the body might be made of a biomedical material such as titanium, silicone or apatite depending on what is the most functional. In some cases implants contain electronics. Some implants are bioactive, such as subcutaneous drug delivery devices in the form of implantable pills or drug-eluting stents.
Many Project Monarch documents were destroyed by Richard Helms, Director of Central Intelligence, in 1973. He was the only such office holder to be convicted of misleading the United States Congress. And he was a member of the assassination group known as Skull and Bones. Early times when Skull and Bones was set up, the information was shown that they were intended to assassinate political leaders, and there's a confession that they killed with poison President William Henry Harrison and Zachary Taylor and others. Helms defended the CIA against the threatened investigation by the famous Senator Joseph McCarthy, whose death, while in a hospital for minor surgery, raises many questions of its own. McCarthy, the anti-communist, was a great threat to the banking cartel. Helms' final assignment was as ambassador to Iran, with diplomatic immunity. Now, I wonder if Arthur Bremer's medical records, the assassin, Arthur Bremer, that this Director Helms, I wonder if he destroyed their records. Those would have been criminal. They would probably have been destroyed. So Helms, the director of the CIA, he destroyed all the records. Congress has shut down the whole MK mind control program because it was testing people without their knowledge and doing all kind of illegal things, and so it was shut down, and Helms, the director, destroyed all the records. And so I'm wondering if the shooter, Arthur Bremer, in this particular assassination attempt and crippling of Governor Wallace, I wonder if his records were destroyed. That's very interesting. Were his records part of those destroyed? The CIA and the Mossad creep up as hungry monsters from the Rothschild Bank's intelligence apparatus, which is known to go back before Napoleon's defeat. The Federal Reserve was set up so we would pay for our own destruction, while putting the nation deeper and deeper in debt, and being fleeced by the European robber barons. The Republican congressman and father of the famous flyer who flew the Atlantic opposed the Federal Reserve System, wrote an excellent book, and tried to warn the nation.
Charles A. Lindbergh, Republican congressman, said about the Federal Reserve Board, "That board administers the finance system by authority of a purely profiteering group. The system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money. The act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. The new law will create inflation whenever the trust wants inflation. From now on, depression will be artificially created."
At the time that they were trying to establish the Federal Reserve, just prior to that, they had murdered ex-president Benjamin Harrison. They had assassinated President Garfield. They had assassinated President McKinley. They had shot President Teddy Roosevelt. So I'm sure that President Woodrow Wilson knew that if he didn't sign the Federal Reserve Act, that he would have been murdered. And even after he signed it and it became law, the next president, Warren G. Harding, might have been able to kill it just with a flick of the pen, just with a signature. And he was poisoned. And then Calvin Coolidge became the president, and his son was murdered by giving him strep in a blister he had on his heel from playing tennis on the White House tennis court. And President Calvin Coolidge says that destroyed the presidency for him, because he had another son. He's afraid he'd get killed too. And then President Wilson became president. He signed the Federal Reserve Act, but his quotes indicate that he wouldn't have. But I think his life was threatened. Not just threatened. He knew if he hadn't signed it, he would be killed, maybe members of his family too. So is the Federal Reserve legal if President Wilson didn't sign it willfully? If he was forced to sign it by fear of death? I don't think that makes a legal contract. We're not obligated to the Federal Reserve. We ought to get rid of it. Now also, another person who opposed it was Charles Lindbergh Sr., who was a Republican congressman. And he said it was a private business, that the Federal Reserve was a private business. Its only interest was making profits for the bankers who owned it. And that's very true. So if you're thinking that the Federal Reserve that controls all the credit and all the money that we all have in our pocket, that they're looking after our interests, no, they're not. There's a private business, and they're only interested in their own profits. So that's the real danger, not only in the United States, but in the whole world, is having something like this. Now, would you think that they might do something to a congressman who opposed their law? Well, yes, he was the father of the famous flyer, and his grandson was murdered. Oh, you say it says he was kidnapped? No. He was taken out of the house far enough away that he wouldn't be heard, and then he was bashed in the head and murdered, and then somebody tried to collect a ransom. That was some side issue, And I think maybe that issue was some kind of a fraud, but I don't have the exact evidence of that, but it looks like a fraud. And an FBI guy that tried to get involved and collect that, he got put in jail for a fraud. So, must be true, huh? I'm certain that President Woodrow Wilson signed that Federal Reserve Act against his will. Why else, other than fear for his very life, will Wilson sign something that he said this about?
In Woodrow Wilson's book The New Freedom, he states the truth. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is privately concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Fearing for his very life, the 28th U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, acting as president, signed the Federal Reserve Act into law.
During his entire life, Governor Wallace had been for the little guy and against the rich and powerful corporate monopoly. He was shot and paralyzed by a Manchurian candidate, a ruthless monster of the wealthy and power-hungry banking cartel's creation. At the instant he was shot, it had become clear that he certainly had sufficient support of the people to become the next President of the United States. Only a fool could believe that old lone nut smokescreen they try to sell us. How does a Manchurian candidate comport themselves? And does Wallace's shooter, Arthur Bremer, exhibit any indications of the methods developed in the CIA labs?
And finally, this gem from the Sherlock Holmes story, The Final Problem. I think that you know me well enough, Watson, to understand that I am by no means a nervous man. At the same time, it is stupidity rather than courage to refuse to recognize danger when it is close upon you.
The FBI chief of Los Angeles, a very large FBI office, was on the radio with us, too. My co-host was Rod Douglas, the famous Hall of Famer radio guy. Mr. Ted L. Gunderson reported that the CIA tracked satanic families. Generation to generation, they tracked the satanic families because they were very easily subjected to mind control. So there's a very, very deep element of Luciferian worship or satanic worship in the MK Ultra mind control Manchurian candidate program. It was there from the beginning. He told us a great deal about this. So this is a very significant aspect of the MK Ultra program because it involves Satanism and satanic families. And he also told us about this. These are referred to as bloodlines and are ostensibly programmed. That means they arrive pre-packaged to fill a destiny as satanic chosen ones. This method was formulated and practiced by Dr. Mengele while at Auschwitz. These bloodlines are described as dysfunctional families, a term frequently applied to the Bremers. The shooter's older brothers had multiple fathers, probably unknown, which relates to satanic cults, group, and ritual sex orgies. Interesting, the bloodliner's skin is to remain pure and unblemished, without marks or scars of electrical prods, needles, knives, or branding iron. No scars like that, as was the case with Arthur Bremer. There also appears to be a pattern of family members affiliated with government or military intelligence agencies who are under the care of government doctors. This information comes out, this kind of information becomes readily available. People think it doesn't mean anything, but it does. Many rock stars, too, had military families and CIA families. Non-bloodliners, those children coming from orphanages, foster care houses, or incestuous families with long history of pedophilia, that are used in this neurological nightmare, are deemed to be expendable and disappear or are murdered. This is from Gunderson's eyewitness found in the Franklin cover-up. Also from information that we have found in human sacrifice rituals at Bohemian Grove attended by prominent Republicans. Many are abused children from families mired in Catholicism, Mormonism, and charismatic churches, as was the shooter, Arthur Bremer. He responded readily to religious dogmatic or legalistic-like heretical structure because it paralleled his base programming, the way he grew up. He did not offer a challenge as his will was being usurped. It was being usurped through subjective and command-orientated mind control conditioning. So it sort of relates to dogmatic church kind of thinking, I guess. The first evidence supporting the conclusion Bremer is being subjected to mind control is when a third-grade teacher wrote this about him.
Arthur has adjusted well in class, but hasn't made an effort as of yet to play with the other children at recess. He was remembered for awkward laughter and not being able to engage in small talk with others.
This behavior of the child is the result of the trauma to which he is being subjected from a very early age.
Project Monarch could be best described as a form of structured dissociation and occultic integration, in order to compartmentalize the mind into multiple personalities within a systematic framework. During this process, a satanic ritual, usually including Jewish Kabbalistic mysticism, is performed with the purpose of attaching a particular demon or group of demons to the corresponding altars. Altars in this context means more than one person or demons wrapped up inside the brain of a single individual, as in one who is possessed. The Encyclopedia.
Arthur Bremer, a Democrat, did not oppose Wallace on political accounts, as say the hecklers might, nor was he even mildly interested in Wallace's speeches and never talked about him, and did not even consider Wallace to be a very important person. However, upon hearing the command from his CIA controller, "A penny for your thoughts," a compartment in Bremer's brain responded, quote, "I have to kill somebody. That's how far gone I am." one of his alters would say that.
Operation Spellbinder was set up to create sleeper assassins, also called Manchurian candidates. These persons could be activated upon receiving a keyword or phrase while in a post-hypnotic trance. The Encyclopedia.
A marionette is a puppet that is attached to strings and is controlled by the puppet master. Hence, monarch programming is also referred to as the marionette syndrome. Imperial conditioning is another term used, while some mental health therapists know it as conditioned stimulus response sequences. The Encyclopedia.
Operation Often was a study which attempted to harness the power of occultic forces. It was possibly one of several cover programs to hide the insidious reality of Project Monarch. The Encyclopedia.
The initial process begins with creating dissociation within the subject, usually occurring from the time of birth to about 6 years. This is primarily achieved through the use of electroshock treatment and is at times performed even when the child is in the mother's womb. Due to the severe trauma induced through ECT, sexual abuse and other methods, the mind splits off into alternative personalities from the core. Formerly referred to as multiple personality disorder, it is presently recognized as dissociative identity disorder and is the basis for monarch mind control programming. An alter ego, the other I, is a second self, which is believed to be distinct from a person's normal or original personality. Some recovered victims report more than 170 different personas, and each is called an alter, and each one has its own unique name. Further conditioning of the victim's mind is enhanced through hypnotism, double-bind coercion, pleasure-pain reversals, food, water, sleep, and sensory deprivation, along with various drugs which alter certain cerebral functions. The next stage is to embed and compress detailed commands or messages within the specified alter. An alter is a demon that has been created in the victim's mind. This is achieved through the use of high-tech headsets, in conjunction with computer-driven generators, which emit inaudible sound waves or harmonics. These affect the RNA covering of neuron pathways to the subconscious and unconscious mind. Virtual reality optical devices are sometimes used simultaneously, with the harmonic generators projecting pulsating colored light subliminals and split-screen visuals. High-voltage electroshock is then used for memory dissolution.
For maximum effective use of these scientific devices, the victim has to have his head shaved. University, medical, and health college campuses performed research for the use of these procedures and special equipment. Arthur Bremer lived virtually in this area and had his head shaved not long before shooting Wallace. Bremer would have been subjected to all of the medical procedures that I have just introduced you to. And this also. Programming is updated periodically and reinforced through visual, auditory, and written mediums. However, on May 22nd, 1971, Bremer's one known friend, Thomas Newman, committed suicide while playing Russian roulette. So here's a very interesting question for you. Can you judge these people we're talking about? Can we judge them by yourself? If you wouldn't do that, then nobody would? That's such a horrible thing that you would never do anything like that. Is it possible then that you believe that this story I'm telling you is totally crazy? It's so fantastic It can't be the truth. I would never do anything like that, so nobody else in the world would. So some awful things are said about these bankers, that they're ruthless, that they have no sympathy for their victims, they are mass murderers, they form monopolies in business and murder people and blackmail them and politically frame them, take over the bar associations, take over judges. All these horrible things are said about these people. So, would you do something like that? In other words, is it proper to make a decision to judge these people by saying, well, nobody would ever do anything like that, because you wouldn't do anything like that? If you're thinking that way, you might need to do some more thinking and some research. We have here a story about Russian roulette. What is Russian roulette? Well, you put one live bullet into a revolver that holds 6 bullets, and so you have 5 empties and 1 load, and you spin it, then you put it up to your head and pull the trigger, and if it goes off and kills you, you lost, I guess, but you got 5 chances. So that's a game that some people play to show their courage. Well, the question is this report that Arthur Bremer's only friend, that's what they called him, his only friend. I wonder about that definition, that this friend killed himself with Russian roulette. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think Bremer, the assassin, had to be tested. He had to be tested by those people controlling him to see if he would actually kill somebody before they sent him out to kill Governor Wallace or somebody else. They had to test him to see if he would actually do that. And so they took another, I'm guessing now, they took another MK Ultra victim, another young man that they had control over, and they had Bremer kill him by under hypnosis as a command of one of his alters to see if that would work, if that was a test. I think they did that. But you can't judge that by what you would do, and you got to remember that this whole project is under the hands of Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, Hitler's science doctor, who did so many atrocious things. So, no, you wouldn't do this. But, and my story sounds fantastic, but there are people who would. The shooter, Arthur Bremer, would be classified in that program as a theta.
Theta, considered to be one of the levels of the monarch, psychic, programming. Bloodliners, meaning those victims coming from multi-generational satanic families, were determined to exhibit a greater propensity for having telepathic abilities than did non-bloodliners. Due to its evident limitations, however, various forms of electronic mind control systems were developed and introduced, namely biomedical human telemetry devices. These are implanted directly into the brain. Also researched and used were directed energy lasers that use microwaves and electromagnetics. It is reported these are used in conjunction with highly advanced powerful computers and sophisticated satellite tracking systems. All of the above from documents obtained with the Freedom of Information Act.
The average citizen has spoken in the state of Florida. They're going to speak throughout the United States. I'm a serious candidate for the presidency on the Democratic ticket in the primaries, and it looks like we're going to Miami with the greatest number of delegates. Thank you very much.
The Florida primary sent him out of there with just like on a rocket for the 1972 presidential election.
The timing of the assassination exposes the motive behind it. Wallace, if elected president, would have, with a stroke of a pen, ended the banking trick that turns the control of the nation's credit over to an insane foreign banking cartel. They believed he would defeat any other candidate, so they killed him.
This matter that they've come up with of busing little children to achieve racial balance is the most asinine, atrocious, callous thing I've ever heard of in the United States.
And I believe that if I win the Florida primary, that Mr. Nixon himself will step in and stop the busing of school children throughout the United States.
I am sending a special message to the Congress tomorrow. I shall propose legislation that would call an immediate halt to all new busing orders by federal courts, a moratorium on new busing.
This civil rights bill will wind up putting a homeowner in jail because he doesn't sell his home to someone that some bureaucrat thinks he ought to sell it to. My friends, a man's home is his castle, and he ought to be able to sell it to people with blue eyes and green teeth if he wants to. It's his home.
I think that Governor Wallace and his beautiful wife would have made a really fun and exciting team in the White House. It would have been something like a second Camelot. Now, what was the first Camelot? That was the Kennedy family. Everybody just sort of, they loved the Kennedy family. Sometimes you disagreed with Kennedy's politics, but you know, you loved the kids and the wife and all the fun things they did. They were funny and they were elegant and they were nice. They were good people. She was riding a horse that was just beautiful, this big, beautiful horse that she was riding, and surfing and all these things. She was a beautiful lady, and Governor Wallace, of course, was so dynamic, as you see in this report. So they would have made an exciting couple for the American people. And I think the American people would have really enjoyed having them in the White House.
And I tell you what, I may not teach you any politics if you listen, but I'll teach you some good manners. I'll teach you some good manners. I'll teach you some good manners. Well, just keep on. You get me 1 million votes every time you show up. I tell you that. Come up here after I've completed my speech and I'll autograph your sandals for you. Who are today calling for communist victory. But they mean free speech only if you let them speak. They don't want anybody else to speak. And I tell you, I love you too, I sure do. Oh, I thought you were a she, you a he, oh my goodness. And when he was in California, a group of anarchists lay down in front of his automobile and threatened his personal safety, the President of the United States. Well, I want to tell you, if you'll elect me the President, I'll go to California. Or I'll come to Arkansas, and some of them lie down in front of my automobile. It'll be the last thing they'll ever want to lie down in front of.
Governor Wallace handled hecklers with great skill and even turned them to his own benefit. It was very strange that there were no hecklers, especially the paid professional dirty trick hecklers, at the shooting scene. The absence induced the party to go into the audience and shake hands.
And their waiting is where the ambush was expertly set.
Just finished speaking and had taken off his coat, was shaking hands when 4 or 5 shots were fired, 2 of them recorded in this film by ABC News cameraman Charlie Jones. Governor Wallace's wife, Cornelia, who was nearby when he was shot, bent over him. Later, she said he seemed to be conscious. The shooting took place so quickly and produced so much confusion that details are still not totally clear.
Just before, and a short distance away in Wheaton, Maryland, rally hecklers were out in force, noisy, yelling and screaming, throwing eggs and tomatoes and even oranges. Some missiles hit and were blocked by Alabama troopers guarding the governor.
Laurel was eerily devoid of these aggressive predators, always dogging the campaign.
It is interesting here in this video that the on-camera TV news reporter already claims that more than 2 shots were fired. But in the rush to scoop the other networks on the live broadcast, they were forced to use the uninterrupted and unedited raw footage from the scene. And you can clearly hear for yourself that Bremer only got off 2 shots. In the Prince George County Police investigation files, several witnesses' reports were recorded, and they reported hearing only 2 shots, while some other witnesses were not sure and could not remember. At maximum, the gun of Bremer's could hold 5, but for safety, 4 would be necessary. Wallace himself was hit 5 times, and 3 more bullets hit other people. Why am I the only one asking this question?
A photo that appeared in the October 16, 1977 issue of the Washington Post, recalling the shooting 5 years later. The article featured Mabel and Ross Spiegel, between whom the would-be assassin literally reached while firing. Ross was the gentleman in the baseball cap, whose tattooed arm you can see grabbing Bremer's arm. Susan Poe commented on a video link of the shooting. The man wrestling the shooter to the ground was my neighbor when I lived on 4th Street. Ross Spiegel and his wife Mabel was beside him. For anyone who remembers, I remember that day very well. From the Laurel Leader newspaper.
Now, I thoroughly believe that Bremer only got off 2 shots. One of the main reasons is because I'm watching this news broadcast and I know how competitive news broadcasts are, and they got some raw footage that hasn't been edited, and they want to scoop everybody else and get the footage on there of the actual shooting of Governor Wallace. They want you to actually see him being shot, so they can scoop all the other television networks and magazines and everything. So what do they show? They show the raw footage, and on that raw footage you only hear 2 shots. Why did Bremer only get off 2 shots? Because he put his gun between a husband and a wife. He reached between a husband and wife, and the guy who was there, the husband, was a tough guy. He was no pushover, and he grabbed Brenner's arm and pulled the gun up and threw Brenner on the ground. They say later that the police did it. No, it was this guy did it. He's the guy that did it. There's a great deal of evidence that this guy grabbed a gun and threw him on the ground. Now, that allowed only 2 shots. I think those 2 shots went wild. And the 2 shots that went wild, one hit a campaign worker and the other hit a Secret Service agent in the mouth. And so all the other shots that were fired by silenced weapons that were hidden. Some raw news footage that got on the air in a rush so that they could knock out the competition and wouldn't be scooped with the news story. They put on some raw video footage, and on that raw video footage you only hear 2 shots. Now later, when they had stock footage that circulated all over, there were more shots. 3 were added on some, and some others had even more shots added. Well, you know, they're fixing the evidence. They're contriving something here. And the newscasters already know what they're supposed to say. That is not the truth.
Now, we are here in Washington, D.C., which is almost the hypocrite capital of the world, where all the folks who stand and talk, include most newsmen, who will look at us down their nose in the South. They don't live in Washington. They live over in Virginia and Maryland. I don't want to get personal with you folks, but I'd like to ask some of you, where do you live? Do you really live in Washington? No, you live in Virginia and Maryland, and yet you'll stand up, and I'm not talking about you personally, I'm talking about newsmen in general, look down your nose at Alabamians and say, you're not doing the proper thing. But at least we've had peace and tranquility in Alabama, and we have good race relations in Montgomery, far superior to what exists right here in Washington or Detroit, where the theoreticians, the folks who sit in an ivory tower and look down their nose at people and try to write guidelines for them. That's an issue in the campaign. I'm going to stop all this guideline writing out of Washington and let people write some guidelines on the local scene.
From the Sherlock Holmes story Silver Blaze is this conversation between Scotland Yard Inspector Gregory and the famous detective. Inspector Gregory asks,
Is there any point to which you would wish to draw my attention?
To the curious incident of the dog in the night time.
The dog did nothing in the night time.
That was the curious incident.
Brilliantly observed Sherlock Holmes.
So in this Sherlock Holmes story, Silver Blaze, the dog doesn't bark. Why is that important? Because Sherlock Holmes solves the case because the dog didn't bark. Why didn't the dog bark? Who controlled that dog? So he solves the case because somebody was controlling the dog. What dog didn't bark in 9/11? There was no prosecution. What dog didn't bark in the JFK assassination? There was no prosecution. Where were the prosecutors? Why weren't the prosecutors barking? The only one that did bark was Jim Garrison, of the Orleans Parish, the district attorney in New Orleans. He proved it was a conspiracy. Later, Congress proved it was a conspiracy too. So he was right, but what happened to him? Look at the movie JFK and see what happened to that prosecutor who barked. Jim Garrison barked, and he was right. Congress proved him right. So no prosecutor, no press, no official, no investigator barks. Too many shooters in the Wallace case. Too many bullets in the Wallace case. No one questions the lone nut theory. It's okay, it's a lone nut theory. Everybody in the country is supposed to believe it. Not me, I don't believe it. So nobody barks. It's very important. You gotta bark, right? You bark too, huh? So the question is, can you solve this particular case? Can you solve 9/11? Can you solve the Kennedy assassination? By who doesn't bark? When the dog doesn't bark, who controls the dog? Who controls the prosecutor? Who controls the justice system? So the dog didn't bark. Sherlock Holmes solves the case because the dog didn't bark. Question is, who controlled the dog? If it was a stranger, the dog would have barked, but somebody had control over the dog. So somebody controls who? The courts, the prosecutors. Why doesn't the prosecutor bark? The prosecutor's supposed to be doing an indictment. Even if he can't get a conviction, there's enough evidence to do an indictment and bring somebody into trial to try to prove they're guilty. I mean, take 9/11. Where's the indictment from the prosecutor? Why doesn't the prosecutor bark on 9/11? Because we all see all the evidence and all the experts that there should be a prosecution. And I think by now we even know who should be prosecuted. So there's no prosecution. Nobody's even tested to see if they're guilty, right? And that's what a prosecution may be. Try and see if they're guilty. So the press doesn't accuse somebody. They all accuse Arthur Bremer. No one questions a lone nut claim. In the mass media and in the power of the government and that kind of stuff. Of course, everybody like me is questioning it, but the people that are officials and have influence over society, nobody's questioning the lone nut case. Brenner's a lone nut. No. So Sherlock Holmes tells us he solved the case because the dog didn't bark. So you can solve this case because the prosecutor didn't indict. That's the idea. The dog didn't bark. The prosecutor didn't indict. And what did they do? Jodie Foster, in a Hollywood movie, presents the lone nut situation and pictures Arthur Bremer as a total nutcase. Very convincing, and so everybody out there sort of believes this Hollywood version, which is just a fiction. It's supposed to be a fiction. If you want the truth, you can't be so easily deceived. People are trying to deceive you. Don't allow them to do it. The control of the mass media and the entire justice system by a wealthy banking cartel that is untouchable is more significant in this shooting incident than the actual shooting incident itself. Think about it. Why didn't the dog bark? The missing evidence is more enlightening than the evidence at hand. The missing evidence. Why are there no ballistic reports on the bullets removed from Wallace and the other people? The mind-controlled Manchurian candidate fall guy is given a command. Then he shows his gun and loudly fires, attracting everyone's attention. He is only the decoy. Simultaneously as planned, 2 or more CIA assassins using custom-made, totally silent weapons that cannot be heard at all, and these weapons have laser sights that can only be seen with special glasses or special contact lenses, shoot both Wallace and his Alabama State Trooper security guard. These are custom designed and built special weapons, pistols, that can be concealed in, aimed, and fired from a camera case, or from a woman's purse, or in a briefcase, or concealed in any way. And you cannot hear them at all. The intent is only to hit the victim with the bullets, because medical assassins will be waiting at the hospital to finish the job. Of the 4 U.S. presidents shot in our history, 2, Garfield and McKinley, did not die of the bullet wounds. They actually died from gangrene planted in their wounds by their own doctors. You can find that in the encyclopedia if you look carefully. So why wasn't Wallace killed by the medical staff? This didn't happen with Governor Wallace because Wallace traveled with his own doctors. There were 3 hospitals involved, Leland Hospital and Prince George, and this leads to confusion. Wallace's own doctor waits his arrival at Holy Cross Hospital in Silver Spring. What would Sherlock Holmes judge of this possibility?
When a doctor does go wrong, he is the first of criminals. He has the nerve and he has the knowledge. Sherlock Holmes.
And as I look at the news coverage and photos, my intuition wonders why they are cropped so tight. Could it be that other shooters and agents have been intentionally cropped out of the picture? No wide frame pictures were put on the mass media and really don't seem to be available. And was it really Brenner's diary that construction crew members found under the 27th Street viaduct? I do not think so. It is a fake that the CIA planted for evidence and to control the conversation, the lone nut kind of thing, right? Bremer never had a diary in his life that I can find, and if he had, it would be found in his apartment, where reporters are reported to have been seen carrying things away before the police took control of the apartment. Unemployed, low-salary Bremer did not have the money to travel so many places and follow around the candidate. Who provided the funds, and why did they provide them? I mean, if you just look in the encyclopedia, he traveled all over the place, all kind of places, stayed in hotels and things. And that's very expensive. He even went to Canada. That's very expensive. And so he had no money, no job. In this video, it may be one of Bremer's CIA controllers on his left. This guy turns away from the camera. Now, what type of people are seen close near Bremer? Two look like agents to me. Young, strong, healthy, intelligent, alert. They have a qualified appearance, similar to a pre-selected undercover police officer. You know, they could be old ladies or teenage girls or something standing around him, yet the people that are around him look like the kind of person that passed the personnel office of the police department. Was Bremer given the command to switch to a different alternative persona called an alter after shooting to ensure that he would forget everything? That is one of their techniques they frequently use. They place alters, and then they place other alters in front of alters so that the alters are blocked. I mean, you know, like one alter may have two or three other alters underneath it, and those alternative personalities or personas, you can't even get to the main personality there, not the central one, but one of the main ones. So was he commanded to forget everything? Is there any evidence of that? When taken into custody by police, Bremer asked, "Where's my car?" And today, getting out of jail, when his long-awaited big chance for fame has come to pass, the reporters flock to his side. His memory is erased, blocked, and holds zero, and all he does is babble about life in prison. Bremer himself gives best evidence of trauma-based mind control of an induced alternative persona when he states,
I would escape my ugly reality by pretending that I was living with a television family and there was no yelling at home or no one to hit me.
The girlfriend's comments are, he claimed to know a lot about psychology and that Bremer acted childish, goofy, and weird. This is the way most untrained persons would describe an encounter with someone with multiple personalities. And this girl was frightened by them. A few months earlier, before the shooting, in November 18, 1971, Bremer was arrested for carrying a concealed weapon and parking in a no-parking zone. At this time, a court-appointed psychiatrist declared Bremer mentally ill, yet stable enough to continue to live in the community. It would be nearly impossible for even a psychiatrist to discover the trigger commands controlling Bremer. But it's almost sure that a professional would likely note alternative personas, or egos. On October 16, 1971, Bremer moved from his parents' house after an argument, that's what they say, and moved into a 3-room, 1-bedroom apartment at 2433 West Michigan Street, which is near Marquette University Medical Science College, where he lived until May 9th after shooting Wallace. Once the shooting was ordered, Bremer's programming would need to be tested and reinforced. He was likely taken to a mind-control site on a military base. He might have been missed if he was still living at home. He would be kept under close observation while in the new apartment and all its surroundings.
I thought they'd shoot him again, and so I jumped on top of him, trying to cover up his head and his heart and his vital organs, his lungs, and there just wasn't anybody around me. Well, the Alabama bodyguard had been shot and blown out, knocked down, and the Secret Service agent these two were supposed to protect his body, got shot in the jaw with vomiting blood.
Another thing you hear a lot about from the victim's security is he was advised not to go into the crowd or is advised to cancel the rally. You can't believe that because the victim's dead. He can't deny that he said it. And you never see, any record of that person actually telling, oh, well, you guys can not jump on my limousine. Just everybody stay off my limousine and the motorcycle motorcade that's following, you stay 10 yards behind me. You didn't hear President Kennedy actually say that, but they said that he said that.
And it's a sad day in our country that you cannot walk even in your neighborhoods at night or even in the daytime because both national parties in the last number of years have kowtowed to every group of anarchists that have roamed the streets of San Francisco and Los Angeles and throughout the country. And now they've created themselves a Frankenstein monster, and the chickens are coming home to roost all over this country.
After his hospital stay, Wallace returned to his duties as governor. In the Democratic primaries of May 1974, Wallace easily won the governor's nomination for a third term without a runoff election. Wallace's final governor conquest was characterized by an unprecedented amount of black voter support during the general election. And one person has claimed that for the former advocate and chief spokesman for the state segregationists, this spelled a complete turnabout for the political career. But I don't agree with that because he was those things, as they claim, but that's because that's what the kind of leadership the people wanted. So he gave them the leadership he wanted. But that's not the way his history shows. That's not the kind of guy that he really was. This was the real Governor Wallace, the way he rose from a humble surroundings where his family and blacks had much in common.
Wallace was for the underdog. I was representing some poor black farmers. They had been stripped of their cotton by a major cotton oil processor in Birmingham. And they sent down these high-priced lawyers and all that, and Wallace was sitting there looking at them, and I was sitting over at another table with my little clients in overalls and all of that. And these people looked down on us, these lawyers did. They wouldn't even refer to us as plaintiffs. They just said those people with a good deal of scorn. And you could see Wallace getting tense over that and giving them the eye. And finally he said to them, when you address Mr. Chestnut from now on, you will address him as Mr. Chestnut. You will refer to his clients as the plaintiffs. Do you understand? And they understood. And Wallace ruled against them and ruled for me in every case. If I was asking for $100, I got $150. He was sitting without a jury. So Wallace was quite different from the rest of the judges in Alabama.
The shooting ended Governor Wallace's national influence. When people saw him speak, if you go and look at when he speaks, his public appeal had a great deal to do with his forthright body language. He would move forward and left and right and move his head and everything. It was a very strong and dynamic presentation. But in the wheelchair, this was lost, and the audience seemed to tune in on his pain. It was no longer the pep rally scene that had propelled him to the primaries from victory to victory. The people felt his tragedy of being paralyzed. It is written somewhere in the Jewish Talmud that the best of the goy, or human cattle, must be killed. The best, the leaders, the best. I do not remember where I heard that. However, the robber baron bankers who call themselves Jews could suddenly be liberated from all their wealth and power with the flick of a president's pen. With the flick of the president's pen, JFK put the control of the nation's credit back into the hands of representative government. He authorized $4.3 billion debt-free dollars. We the people could do this for ourselves anytime and end all the atrocities of the sinister New World Order. The national debts of multitude of nations would dissolve and disappear everywhere in the world. There is debt-free money available to all those countries, even European countries. It does not take guns, it takes understanding. The billionaire bankers have a trick. The billionaire bankers have a dirty trick. The billionaire bankers have a criminal trick. And with this trick, they can take over everything. That is, buy it and give us the bill. When they control the volume of money in circulation, that's what they can do. We cannot defend ourselves from this scam if we ignore it, or do not understand that banks do not get their money the same way working class people do. They don't work. The banks don't work. The bankers almost pick money off a money tree without hardly lifting a finger.
What one man can invent, another can discover. Sherlock Holmes.
President James A. Garfield, with expert knowledge of the money system, was shot and killed shortly after he said,
"Whoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all commerce and industry."
Unless you become more watchful in your states, and check the spirit of monopoly and thirst for exclusive privileges, you will in the end find that the control over your dearest interests has passed into the hands of these corporations. President Andrew Jackson.
Banks lend by creating credit. They create the means of payment out of nothing. Repeat, out of nothing, out of nothing, out of nothing, stated Ralph M. Hawtrey, Secretary of the British Treasury.
I think that there are certain crimes which the law cannot touch, and which therefore, to some extent, justify private revenge. Observed Sherlock Holmes.
So I know a trick. The trick is, when people call me a screwball or a conspiracy theorist or something like that, I have a trick, and my trick is called the truth. So I just stay with the truth, and you would be amazed that when you stay with the truth wins out in the long run. And particularly, now this is very interesting, somebody who has told you that you're a conspiracy theorist, when they hear the truth from 2 or 3 other people, they start changing their minds. Those people suddenly begin to wake up. That's how it works. Think of that instead of saying, well, they called me, I feel terrible, they called me a screwball, they called me a conspiracy theorist. No, don't think that way. So don't be discouraged and mum up if they label you with derogatory names, because it's the nature of truth that more than one person you tell, the more times the truth gets told over and over again. And it sounds forth in the world. And then the truth gains a little more persuasion with each new voice. So that's your goal. You got to tell people the truth. And the truth is, don't let the bankers control the volume of money in circulation. As Rothschild says to us, when he does it, he's got the whole country in his grip. Tell the truth. Tell as many people as you can. And that's how you overcome them.